We spoke about the importance of Sanskrit, and is it a tool only to access our texts, or is it also important as a way of thinking for every Indian? What are its two roles that the language can play today?
Well, to give you an example, a few hundred years ago, an educated person in Europe knew Latin in addition to their spoken language. And this is because Latin is the basis of French, Portuguese, Spanish, the so-called Romance languages. And Latin is more precise and scientific grammatically, in terms of roots, in terms of the structures of its usage. So it was considered a more intelligent language and a more scientific language. In fact, at one time, the English language just dumped 1,000 Latin words in to make the language smarter. Now, that Latin language was preceded by the Greek, and both of them were preceded by the Sanskrit. So if someone wanted to be a linguist and a scholar and be as well informed as they could be and have the most specific vocabulary, even for apparently abstract concepts that cannot be defined in English, then they would learn Sanskrit. Any of us coming in from the outside of the culture, like myself, have done this and have learned at least several hundred words of Sanskrit vocabulary. And so this is part of the issue that we're talking about, because how do you bring that very precise language and its meanings into a vague and imprecise language like English?
How early do you think this? We've had in the last 1 week, there has been discussion about technical and school education being taught in the mother tongue of the child, and so that they said that learning is easier if it's in the mother tongue. So how do we distinguish between how we learn things, in what language should we learn it, and how do we use it in our day-to-day life? So how does Sanskrit, what role will Sanskrit? But also there was another story from the in a university in Canada which said a lot of computer science students are now learning Sanskrit. So it's being used as a utility language for the practical world too.
Because of that precision I was speaking of. And I think you could say that in most regards, that is an exploitation of Sanskrit for a purpose that wasn't its original intention, but rather it's a use for it to just do material tasks because of its precision in making machines and in talking about the procedures of logic that computers use. In fact, I was in Silicon Valley for years, and one of the things I found out was that the binary mathematical system, the basis of computers, is from the Rig Veda. So first of all of these advanced mathematical capabilities came from the Veda and are unacknowledged by Western civilization. So did the Latin and Greek that are the backbone of much of their intelligent languages. So here's the thing, since we're not going to get everybody to learn Sanskrit right away, if they get a vocabulary of about 1 to 200 Sanskrit words that describe concepts that don't exist in English, then that will begin the process of Sanskrit being recognized as having meanings about reality that no other word in any language can compare to or can describe. See?
And
we have hundreds of millions of yogis now that we didn't have before.
Mhm.
But they're sort of yogis and sort of not. They're doing asana. They're trying, but a lot of them, it's just still exercise. Others, they're doing a little pranayama and a little study and mantra or two. So what they also need is a vocabulary that English does not have. And eventually this will create the recognition that certain very profound concepts can only be spoken in Sanskrit.
So why did you choose the Bhagavad Gita, and how many of these 108 words that you plan to choose come from your translation of the Bhagavad
I would say most of them, because the Sanskrit words, of course, the most easy to understand is dharma, and its incorrect equivalent word, which is not its equivalent in English, is religion. So if somebody in the West says, oh, the Hindu religion, then the Hindu practitioner should say to them, actually, the word religion is religare, it's Latin, and it means bound by a book of rules. So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are religions. There's only 3 religions in the world, and they each have a book, and that book gives them rules to obey, and it's mandatory to obey those rules. Catholic Church was a very good example of this, because even the priests didn't know Latin during the medieval times and so forth, but they had a book of rules that everyone had to follow. But the word dharma is from a root, the dhatu, dri, and the root of dri is ri, and the ri, or ritam, are the laws of nature. Christianity doesn't have anything like this, neither does Judaism, neither does Islam. They don't even have a concept like that. So a dharma, the word dharma and karma, came from this ritam, or the laws of nature. And the cause and effect, karma does not mean cause and effect. It means cause and effect from life to life. But you see, there's no concept of life to life in the 3 Abrahamic religions. So next, karma becomes dharma, dri, D-H-R-I, and dri means the essential nature of a thing, which if you take it away, it is no longer itself. So take a cup. A cup is a cup. That's its essential nature. So the dharma of the cup is to hold. So we're a dharma culture because we're trying to cooperate with nature, but not just through a book of rules, but in every possible way. And the language Sanskrit defines that as Svadharma and Sanatan Dharma. So now using that modifier, one's own, now that means the particular body type, particular karmas of the body that we're talking about. And the Atma is not the body, and the body is seen as a car, a vehicle. Indeed, the word in Sanskrit is karana. The English word car comes from that. So this deeper way of looking is very different than here's your book of rules, do what you're told. That's not Dharma. And then Sanatana Dharma means it's always true for everyone at all times in all circumstances. So there are so many of these distinctions, and by failing to make them, then the Hindu community finds it very difficult to describe themselves and their culture to their children and to their neighbors and the people they know around them. So instead they go silent and don't say, or they use several words like angel, hell, heaven, soul, many gods, and so on, because everyone else seems to be using them, so they use them. But now they can't explain their own culture.
when did this interest in getting Sanskritization of English and the accuracy of the sentiment and the philosophy of Indian tradition, when did it begin? And when did you see this discord between the 2 languages and the impact it's having on the way people approach Sanatana Dharma?
Sure. Well, it began in my high school days and then early college days that I was not satisfied with Christianity as a religion and the answers it gave, or any of the other philosophies of the West. So for me, inquiring into the world culture was natural. And then as the more I studied, every subject led back to India. So the more I looked into that, German is based on Sanskrit, and the German philosophers had taken from it. I saw the psychologists of the Western civilization were taking ideas from Vedic knowledge and then making them their own theory. So the more I studied, the more I saw this is all leading back somewhere. And this was in the 60s, so this was the time when, starting with the Beatles and people like that, this awareness of gurus coming and acharyas coming from Bharat to the West was an entirely new thing. And those of us in that generation, if we were curious and dissatisfied with the answers in our own culture, we began to take gurus and learn from them. And so I was in the ashram for 5 years, from 23 to 28, as a brahmachari, sleeping on the floor, etc., serving my guru. And I was one of his editors, helping to edit the books that he was bringing into English from Sanskrit. And eventually, I took Sanskrit as well from a Pandita from India. His name was Ramanath Sharma, and he had memorized the 4,000 grammatical rules of the Ashtadhyayi. He was Pandita. I'm not Pandita, that's Pandita. So gradually, this became my path. So when you come in from the outside, you have to examine everything. And in a way, you are having to translate it across. And eventually, I realized some were not able to be translated with an English equivalent. And so this led me gradually to study etymology and linguistics. And then I saw the deeper problems.
I found a lot of people distinguishing between academic study of our texts and of the language and actual immersion where it becomes life transforming. A lot of
Right.
Indians may not actually, we have a 10 o'clock Ramayana class every Tuesday. And it's not, many of us don't know Sanskrit, but we can feel the essence and the spirit. And even very old people, very young people all over India have the essence and they get the gist and the spirit of Sanatana Dharma. And many academicians from the West who have studied the text have better grasp of the language and of the text than us, but miss the wood for the trees. So how do we get both for both sets of people, for both Indians as well as the West?
Well, first of all, not everyone is meant to be a scholar because that's what the Varnas are. The Varnas are not caste system, they're a skill. So I've renamed them from, or to illustrate them, from Ramanuja Acharya, Vaishya Shudra to professor, protector, producer, and provider. So these abilities are not determined from your genetics or your birth per se in a family, but rather when you get educated and as you grow up, your svadharma, your real abilities start to emerge. So the Vedas are very clear on this, and so is the Gita, that you can be of many different temperaments, and as you said, but still have the essential internal experience of being the Atma, of Bhagavan, of Paramatma, of the various subjects and concepts. This is exactly why I'm starting with a couple of hundred vocabulary words for the Western world. But unfortunately, the Hindu community wasn't taught that way because they've just been trying to survive and recovering from colonization. So it wouldn't be fair to say, why haven't you done this? I've been busy getting a business and building a life and taking care of my family. So some of us who came in from the outside, like myself, saw these problems, but we also had the essential experience. We were obviously doing this, Bahunam Janmanamante, Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate, Vasudeva Sarvamiti, Samahatma Sudurlabha, from a previous life. Chapter 7, verse 19, Bhagavad Gita. After many births, pursuing jnana and understanding it clearly, then one comes to know Vasudeva Sarvamiti. Know is not intellectually, but to know it by direct experience, through initiation. So this initiatory process touched some of us, and some of us adopted it as our whole life. I did. So at age 23, I made that commitment and I never changed one bit. Just kept learning and studying and growing and talking to gurus and having more gurus and acharyas.
There's a lady from the UK who's now settled in India, and she said when she was a child she used to doodle, and now she realized all the doodling that she was doing was actually in Devanagari and in you also talk about past birth carryovers, and how does one realize that this is something that's gift or a transition from something where we've left off? How do you get that inner awareness?
Well, one of the subjects that I studied and pursued was after I finished 5 years in the ashram. I had been a Western astrologer before I went into the ashram. I found a guru to teach me Jyotish. And I've been a Jyotishi ever since, a practicing Jyotishi. So the concept, of course, is that the Atma is immortal, cannot die, cannot be cut, cannot be burned. Dehinosmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jara tata dehantaras praptir diras tatra navuyate. And then what? It's like changing clothes. So the Atma is changing clothes from body to body. We have this term, don't you? Coconut? White on the outside, brown on the inside. And then there's also the reverse of that. So it's probably the case that during colonization, the karma for many people from England was to be reborn with brown skin as Hindus. They're the ones who don't care about their tradition. So their karmas from their previous life show up in that way. And then there's a larger group that have the memory over many lifetimes. So when they take birth, they start out where they continue where they had left off. This understanding is present in Jyotish, in the horoscope, because through it you can see the Varna. You can see what the person's best skills will be. And they have nothing to do with what their parents' Varna is. It has to do with where the grahas are in their Rasi chakra. So when you understand this, and then Ayurvedic medicine, one of the books I've written is called God, Goddess, the Astrologer. I wrote it 23 years ago, so I don't use the word God anymore. But at that time, it's the description of how from the horoscope, the astrologer can predict the Ayurvedic body type, the dosha, of the client without seeing them. And in those days, I would have the person's birth information, make their Rasi chakra, talk to them on the phone, not see them, and tell them what they look like, what their body type was, whether they were Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So in the educational system of ancient Bharat, always the teachers used the Jyotish as a guide to the possible tendencies and abilities of the students. And they worked hand in hand with Ayurvedic physicians to tailor their diet in an appropriate way for their health and well-being. And every family knew about this the same way they knew that the spices and chutneys and other things they were putting in the dinner were in relative amounts to each person according to their Ayurvedic body type.
Even the way Ayurveda Vaidyas take the pulse, it's not just the cardiac pulse rate, but it can actually tell you what's the course of your health is going to be. So
let me tell you a funny story.
Yeah.
So in town in Vancouver, there was an Ayurvedic doctor and his wife that lived here. We met them and they invited us over for dinner. And while dinner was cooking, then the doctor said to me, the Vaidya, he said, let me do your pulses and tell you when, at what age you had your childhood diseases. Just what you said. And he said, well, 8 years old, you had mumps, and 11 years old, you had chickenpox, and this and that and that. He said, is that right? And I said, yes. And you have moon in Kataka, in Cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yes, you're right. So as a Jyotishi, I could see his manas. And I knew which of the 12 signs, rashis, he was. And he could feel those pulses you were talking about because each of these is an ancient Vedanga, or it's a limb of the Veda, or it's one of the ancillary Vedas, Upaveda, that comes with the rest of the body of the Vedic knowledge.
So, do you think this interdisciplinary flow of knowledge and the same spirit that flows through the Vedangas and the Upavedas? So, is this a person who wants to immerse themselves in Indian culture? Should they be exposed to all branches of? We have now specializations, we have super specializations, but immersion into Indian culture, what kind of what are the things that you would emphasize that a person be exposed?
Well, I would certainly say that it's important to remember if the Abrahamic religions are the people of a book, then the Vedic culture are the people of a library. And if you remember the story, during the avatar of Krishna, Bhagavan, during that time, Veda Vyasa Deva wrote down all of the library of Vedic knowing so that it would not get lost. And eventually, the Ashtadhyayi Panini solidified that grammar to a point of perfection. So this process of bringing down the whole library would be like saying, if someone goes to college, should they get a PhD in every subject? And the answer is no, but they would have a general curriculum of things they should know. So once again, they would share a common vocabulary of several hundred words and definitions. And for some people, that will be sufficient for them to stay dharmic and live their life a particular way that's useful. And they'll pick up new words as they go on, as all adults would tend to do, but gradually. And so only certain people, according to their nature, would want to be overachievers about knowing the Veda, because no one person would know all of it anyway. So therefore, this is why we have such respect for pundits and acharyas, because they embody, you might say, an aspect of the Vedic library. So I call the people of Bharat people of the library.
My yoga teacher was mentioning last week, my yoga guru, that as we become academic, as we immerse ourselves more in the knowledge of these texts, it's also important to keep our sadhana alive. Sometimes we miss doing the practice, whether it's in yoga or in other aspects. So you mentioned
Right.
that you still do 2 hours yoga, and how does that consistency of practice, how has that uh, influenced and impacted on your learning of Sanskrit and the text?
All right. Well, first of all, of course, yoga doesn't mean just the Ashtanga yoga, the Ashtadhyayi, but it also means Bhakti yoga, Jnana yoga, all the different forms of yogic practice. So I've also studied 6 different styles of martial arts since I was quite young. So martial arts, yoga, and dance, Ashtanga yoga, are all methods of bringing the body to balance. For a dancer, if they don't know where the balance is, then they fall down. For a warrior, same thing. If you're sword fighting, then if you don't know where the center is, you'll fall down. If you don't know where to direct the life force, then you'll also be always unbalanced. So pranayam, but more particularly, the Yoga Sutras in the second pada, there's 4 padas, first verse says, tapasya, svadhyaya, ishvara pranidhan, kriya yoga ha. The 3 activities of yoga are tapasya. So that's what you were just asking about. It's not austerity. That's the wrong word. Austerity means hot winds from Australia, auster. So it means overheating yourself by doing painful, forceful tapasya. But that's not tapasya. Tapasya is a part of the limb of yoga. You use it to bring yourself to balance, restore your system, to align everything again. So in my 2-hour sadhana every morning, I do 2 hours of mantra. I accompany it with asana and pranayam and other practices. And so in this way, I continue doing tapasya every day. Now, the word tapasya is from the word tap, and tap means to generate heat, among other things. And then that heat is related to the word pit, as in pitta. So the pitta constitution has more heat. Tapasya generates heat to heat the body up so you can remold it in the image of a higher reality. So all yogis are enjoined not just to do tapasya for a couple of years, but to do tapasya every day. So tapasya, svadhyaya, to know one's own self as the Atma correctly, and then Ishvara Pranidhan, the much misunderstood devas leading up to the ultimate devas, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, and finally leading to Paramatma, Bhagavan, Brahman, Brahman iti, Paramatma iti, Bhagavan iti, Shabjate. This Ishvara Pranidhan is that we're supposed to introduce ourselves to and become acquainted with each of the devas in their primary activities because they're part of the cosmos we live in. And each one of them is an Ishta, meaning the head of a department of nature. So the Ishvara Pranidhan begins at a lower level with getting to know the beings closest to you. And this is what drives Christianity crazy and Islam. They never can understand that FedEx has millions of workers. But when a FedEx comes to your door with a package, you don't say, "Thank you, Mr. President." This isn't the president of FedEx, but you do say thank you to the person who just delivered the package. So the devas are not the ultimate goal, and the Gita says it clearly in many texts too, but rather they're heads of departments. Still, we should know them. We should have a relationship with them, but it should not be give me this, give me that. That's a corruption. The yajna, the Agnihotra yajna, is saying thank you to the devas. It's not asking them for material wealth or anything. So this asking for things, dehi, 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 is a corruption. But the Ishvara Pranidhan really is getting to know them, and a proper guru will initiate you into all the mantras necessary to climb that ladder of Ishvara Pranidhan until you get to the top of it.
So much. And one last question. How in these difficult times where people are both morally disturbed and distracted, as well as physically down, and the mind is also in turmoil, body is also having afflictions. So how does the Bhagavad Gita help to regroup our lives, and what according to you would be its core message in these times?
Yes. Well, you asked a question earlier about where I began, and I began my university days with a 5-year of study of psychology and getting a degree in that, as well as in poetry literature. From the psychology degree, I observed the human condition and the various methods of trying to rectify that. So you can say that it's the study of the manas. If you're familiar with the name Sigmund Freud, and anyone who studied psychology is, Sigmund Freud invented the word psychoanalysis. And the word psycho comes from the Greek goddess Psyche. And Psyche is present when butterflies are flying around out in the yard near flowers. So analysis means to analyze and get rid of what shouldn't be there. So the translation that Freud gave to psychoanalysis was freeing the butterfly. Now, this is the Atma. He couldn't say freeing the Atma. He couldn't say freeing the soul, or he'd get in religious waters and get in trouble with Christianity. So he said freeing the butterfly in a metaphor. But that's what exactly the Bhagavad Gita says. You're the Atma. If you forget that, you'll get lost in other self-definitions. And of course, the other thing that you said that's so poignant is we are at a historical moment that resembles the Mahabharata. Democracy, people on both sides of democracy, they hate each other. They're saying despicable things of each other. People don't have great character, are becoming leaders in nations, and so on. So I made up a term the other day that what we really need is a dharmocracy. And in a dharmocracy, that's the Vedic viewpoint, we use everything according to its true nature with a sustainable view of Mata Bhumi, Mother Earth, and our relationship to all living entities. So all of that respectful self-definition rests upon the basic truths of the Bhagavad Gita, the gunas, the doshas, the atma, the paramatma, the relationship with the devas, the lokas, the 14 lokas, and our relationship to them. So it gives us a cosmology. It gives us what I would like to say to you as a world view. So the Bhagavad Gita is the summary statement, as you suggested, so that the everyday person can have access to the self-definitional statements that they need to not get lost without having to be a scholar and read the whole Vedas. And this version that we've just come out with, the Bhagavad Gita Comes Alive, is just the 701 verses of the Bhagavad Gita with no purports, no explanations. It's just like the conversation took place. And I left 100 or so Sanskrit words in the verses, didn't translate them. Then with a definition in the glossary that helps the reader to know how to use that word, took out all the Christian colonizing words, and then used plain English that doesn't have twisted meanings. And the whole thing now is just for the everyday person to read the Bhagavad Gita from beginning to end, or 3 verses or 1 chapter, without any interference, because it was designed for that. That's why it's a conversation. That's why it's on the eve of a difficult, turbulent moment. So we know what to do with it when we're in a turbulent moment like this whole COVID crisis that we're going through and so on.
Thank you so much for your time, Jeffrey. It was lovely having this conversation with you. Thank you so
But
much. Namaste.
my pleasure as well.
Yeah. I will
Thank you,
share
Anna.
the article and the recording with you.
All right.
And my
Namaste.
thanks to Sandy G too.
Thank you. Oh, and there's one thing I didn't say at the beginning that I usually do, because we were always talking, but it is Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I hold myself accountable to the Vedic Acharyas in the teaching of the Vedic Vidya. I do not do it like I want to as an independent player, but to the best of my ability, I take shelter of the great Vedic Acharyas and present it as they have presented it. And this is the new renaissance that's happening. It's a renaissance of the Vedic library and the Saraswati civilization in all its brilliance. And in the next 50 to 100 years, Sanskrit vocabulary will be common around the planet. Hundreds of millions of new yogis will also now participate in that way at a deeper level. So it's exciting to me to be with you in this way because we represent this new step in the renaissance of Vedic Vidya. So in a way, India had to get colonized first to crack it open, and then it colonized the rest of the world. So the joke I have is that after the British took everything from India, the acharyas and gurus said, wait a minute, you forgot the best stuff. You forgot the jewels. So then they came to the West and gave the jewels of Vedic knowledge to us, the grandchildren of the colonizers. That's karma for you. So now it's worldwide, and members of the Vedic community are worldwide. So we're just now reviving the Renaissance.
Thank you. Very kind of you. Namaste and good night.
Thank you, Apar. Great to be with you.
Same.